Good evening. How you doing? This is Minister Pt.1 of 66 Books of Truth Ministries, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day, and may God bless you. Shouts out to the Maximized Manhood Men Study. Men, we got to be strong men in these tough times. Our children need us. Our wives need us. Our community need us. The church need us. Or even on the jobs, even in government, they need strong men in these tough times. We have been studying out the book called Strong Men in Tough Times by Ed Cole, and we are now on chapter 5. And chapter 5 discusses about the maturity of being a man, the maturity of being a man, men maturing. I know men, they're running around here in their 50s and 60s, still running around here trying to talk to 21 and 22-year-old girls, talking about they have intelligent conversations. If you're a 60-year-old man, more than likely you're tuned in to listening to some B.B. King or Tyrone Davis versus a 20 or 22-year-old who's off into Lil Wayne or Nicki Minaj. What kind of intelligent conversation are you going to have there? What kind of intelligent conversation are you going to have about life and marriage and children and relationships? What's the experience there that you're going to connect with? There's no way. So the thing is that God created men to be on a certain level, and that is the highest level that He created for a man to be on. And that's what we got to get, men. That's why we need strong men in these tough times. So today we're going to get started on page 67, chapter 5. And the first thing that it talks about, it says, what's the difference between government bonds and men? Guess what? Bonds mature. Some men don't. How do you force a man to do sit-ups? It says that you put a TV remote control between his toes. And he's going to get up there because he want to change that channel to his favorite channel. So they only move when they want to or when it's necessary for them to move. Why is it a good thing there are women astronauts? So when they get lost in space, women is going to ask questions. A lot of us men, we don't like to ask questions, and I am going to say I am one. God is still working on me on that. I'm starting to do it because my wife always says, why you don't like to ask questions? Why you don't like to ask for directions? Because our mentality is we got this. We ain't going to read the instructions. We got this. And then when something go wrong or happen, then we get frustrated and mad, and then we end up getting mad at the closest person next to us. It goes on to say, what does a man consider a 7-course meal? It says a hot dog and a 6-pack. Really? Just keep it simple, huh? We're not into all the fancy food and decoration. Hey, just give me a hot dog and a 6-pack, or just give me a hamburger and a 6-pack, and I'm good. I ain't worried about the steak and the caviar and the crab meat and all the other sides and fine wine and different glasses to drink out of. We ain't worried about all that. We just want to keep it simple. Fried chicken, mashed potato, green beans, and some watermelon and some strawberry soda water, right? Okay. All right, it goes on to say, sure, those are male-bashing jokes, and they're not lost on men. It says, for years, men have made everyone the butt of their humor, sick, black, vulgar, but to have your wife or a woman to make fun of you or your children laughing along is something that's different. It's something totally different. It's okay if you do it, but when they do it to you, it's a problem, right? Well, it goes on to talk about bonds mature. The meaning is not lost on us. Men do not automatically mature as they grow older. A lot of men don't automatically mature as they grow older. Some of them go backwards. It's a lot of things it's a lot of steps that go into being mature. Okay? Maturity is measured by accepting responsibility. Maturity is measured by the acceptance of responsibility. I see and I've noticed a lot of men, young and old, do not want to accept responsibility. There are a lot of men. You're not leading. You're not being the priest or the pastor of your home. You're not even taking care of your wife or your children. There are a lot of men that don't even pay the bills. There are a lot of men don't do anything but sit around, smoke weed, play video games, and want to run around and play around while the wife is working 1 or 2 jobs, or she got a great career and she's pulling in the money, and he just gonna lounge around and take it easy. Now, that's what she let you do. That's what she let you do. But as a man, I just couldn't do it. God gave a man responsibility. That's one of the first steps that God gave a man is responsibility. The male, it says, in the male, it's measured by responsibility in the God-given stewardship to do what? Guide, guard, and govern. These are the steps that God gave. It's measured by responsibility in the God-given stewardship is to guide, guard, and govern. Okay? To direct, to protect, and to be an overseer. To make it plain, God gave Adam these threefold responsibilities in regard to the earth. Every man since Adam has been charged with it. So every man has those 3 responsibilities: to guide, guard, and govern, to direct, to protect, and to oversee. You better get on it, men. God needs strong men in these tough times. Daniel's mature handling of the hardest issues of life marked him as a real man. Even as a teenager, this young man was focused. He was dedicated. He didn't deviate. He gave his life to the Lord. He worshiped and praised and followed the steps of God. Was he a perfect man? No. But he knew how to work toward perfection and perfecting what he wanted in life. By the time of his capture as a teenager, he had already become mature in knowledge gained as a child of Israel. He added to the education of the king's house in Babylon, which must have been substantial. Babylon produced the Hanging Gardens, one of the greatest wonders of the world, in the ancient world, which indicates something of the wisdom of their culture. So it was something there. It goes on to say Daniel's maturity was a personal process of development in a series of many steps. The serious discipline and spiritual-minded approach in his tender age and his young age produced the foundation for a lifetime of statesmanship. His depth of spirituality was revealed in a miracle that occurred while he was still young. Okay? It goes on to talk about Daniel and his friends. They were in the king's house. They was educated by what they call the men of letters, very educated men, very high-profile men, very educated. And the king called all his wise men one day to interpret a dream. And he insisted they not only give him the interpretation, but he didn't even remember what the dream was about. Okay? So guess what? None of them couldn't even comply. Even his well-educated servants and wise men couldn't even think about or interpret anything that the king was saying. So it say, as a result, since they couldn't do this, all the king's wise men of the kingdom was sentenced to death. They were to be put to death because they couldn't interpret, they couldn't remember the king's dream. But guess what? When Daniel heard of this impending doom, he enlisted his friends and himself to pray for revelation for the dream and its interpretation. The gift of dream interpretation was given by God to Daniel that night that none of the prophets of even Israel could even produce. None of the prophets of any land could even produce. And guess what? Of all Daniel's knowledge, the greatest could not even acquire his teaching, not even the teachers of Israel, nor the wise men of Babylon, it goes on to say. It was known the voice of God. Only the voice of God was put into the hearts of Daniel and the 3 friends who prayed that God give them the interpretation and the vision and the knowledge of this dream to give to the king. And guess what? When the dawn had came, the wise men, they was to be slaughtered. But Daniel volunteered to go to the king. And guess what? Those men's lives were saved because God had given Daniel the revelation of that dream. And those wise men's lives were saved. And out of that, this is what happened. Daniel was put in a high position, and his 3 friends were also put in a very high position in Babylon. The work of God does not come by the will of man, nor by the will of the flesh, but by the will of God only. The work of God does not come by the will of man, nor by the will of the flesh, but by the will of God only. God is at work in a man's life, both to will and to perform his good pleasures. Not your own pleasures, not the pleasures of Satan, to perform the pleasures of God. It goes on to talk about God's good pleasure is to perform in each man that which fulfills his unique purpose and maximize the potential of his life. Of his life. Isn't God good? Isn't God good? I'm going to repeat that again. God's good pleasure is to perform in each man that which fulfills his unique purpose and maximize the potential of his life. This is why God designed us men to be at the highest level that he designed us to be. If you're not there, that means that you're living below the standards that God created you to be. And as men, we need to stand up and be strong men in tough times. Now, along with this, you have a choice to choose maturity. It's either you want to be immature or you want to be mature. Your choice. Here's a story about 2 men by the name of Ben and Ray. They went to work at the same time for a large church in Midwestern part of the United States, both in supported positions. They was in some high positions at a large outreach church. They both were from a church background, but from different parts of the country. They were well versed on the manner and the styles of the Christian worship. They knew church was very large in number. It was an international church that did things all across the world. The senior pastor was expansive in the spirit, generosity. He gave hospitality, and he had a great big vision of where they wanted the church to continue to go and grow. So both heartily congratulated themselves on landing the jobs, and the ministry was exciting, and they was excited, and their families were excited for them, and they were very happy and proud of them. But very quickly, Ray felt very overwhelmed by the freedom of worship that the other staff members exhibited at weekly prayer services. He felt ashamed of his lack of spiritual knowledge in comparison to other staff members, of his inability to join in conversation about the international church and things that was going on. So he went home and began to thumb through his Bible and some passages that he could contribute to the prayer time. And he scribed some magazines and to read portions of it as conversational material as they began to have conversation. He began to dress to impress his colleagues. He bought jewelry like crosses and status symbols, and occasionally he tried to use scripture references in his conversation. But, when working intimately at times with the pastor, he never took notes or made an effort to apply to even teach. So, while he was sitting in the midst of these people, he was never taking notes about things that they were talking about the church and things, what they wanted to do in order to grow. This was the difference between Saul and David. Saul never wrote down anything. David did. And you can tell by the writings he did in the Old Testament. Okay? So his boss noticed this and that he was having difficulty. So he took him out to lunch several times to talk to him and pray with him to help him grow in his new position. But you know what? Ray never did. Because what Ray was trying to do, he was covering up something that he really didn't know. Okay? But his friend Ben, he worked in a different area. He felt the same around the staff that he was around, but he realized his spiritual immaturity in relation to them. And guess what? He recognized he was not in a commitment to God, but to the church. He realized something. Wait a minute. I'm supposed to be doing this for God, not the church. Because if I do it for God, it's going to help the church. So he had to put God first in order to make things go as it should and to be in order. So with his troubling spirit, he asked his supervisor and his associate pastor, he asked them out to lunch, and he had made a confession to them. He said he didn't know what he was getting himself into as he was hired. And Ben said, how so? The associate asked, well, the way everyone prays out loud and talks constantly about all these missions around the world, I've never been around people like this. So Ben never really been around people like this, but he had a heart to want to do it. But he knew that somewhere along the way, he was so busy trying to do things for the church instead of do it for God. Because if you do it for God first, who is your first love, everything else will follow. Okay, goes on to talk about. So they talked about it, and his boss told him, and his other friend told him, the associate, say, you know what? This is what you need to do. Ben, you need to go back to your first love and find that relationship with the Lord. Because it has grown stale. It's like you have kind of put God on the back burner, and you're trying to physically just do work in the rare form. You need to do it in a spiritual form, and in the spiritual form will take the place of the rare form, and things will go better for you. He said, God's desire to have a relationship with you. God has a desire to have a relationship with you, Ben, and he wouldn't have brought you this far. So he wouldn't have brought you this far, Ben, to tell you, okay, now that's it. No, he brought you here for a reason. This is a big-spirited church with big-spirited employees. Right, okay. So Ben recognized that. So what Ben had to do was say, look, let me go back. So Ben drove home, and he grabbed his steering wheel tightly. And these are the things he said to himself. I'm small-spirited. He cried out in frustration. I'm small-minded in the background. I have small vision and small desires. Well, most men, we will think like that. But if we put ourselves in a position to put God first, we'll see things much differently, because God is a big God. God wants us to ask for things above and beyond. And when we are mature enough to handle it, that's when he would give it to us. Okay? So he thumbed the steering wheel with his last three words. And then at dinner, he went home that night, and him and his wife were supposed to have dinner, but he announced to his wife, I don't want to join you with TV tonight. There's something that I must do. So he went alone into his room. He opened up his Bible to the page 1, and then he began to read. And he started to read stories that was familiar and things that connected with what he was going through. And he refused to skim. He read continuously and constantly. He didn't even fall asleep. He continued to read night after night. He prayed fervently for God to give him this big heart. He sensed the change finally, because he knew that I had to put God first. I got to give God my heart, and God would lead me, and he would give me these visions. He would help me. Okay? And as he did this, a new meaning sprang to him. Out of a remote passage about deserts, tabernacles, and prophets, from the revelation came a new love for God, his first love. And prayer became more than a duty to perform. You see, sometimes we just praying as a duty because it's something that, that's what mom and dad taught me, and I'm going to just do it. No. I go to church because that's what my mom and dad did. No. That's not why we do it. It's not a performance. This is why we got to put God first. So Ben was renewed, and he began to enter into a larger spirit. God gave him a revelation. God gave him something. And he realized that, hey, God is my first love now. I see things differently. Ray, however, continued to drift outwardly, and because he was too busy trying to impress people, okay, with his own way of doing things. So both Ray and Ben, they were cut from the staff because eventually this pastor decided to downsize in the church staffing. So Ray went back to his secular job. Ben, guess what? Just because he made those steps to mature, he was blessed to get a position at a better church elsewhere with more pay and a better career advancement because he chose to put God first. He didn't want to do things on his own. He became a very influential man of righteousness and continued the maturing process he started when he was challenged with a new beginning. So men, these are choices that you have. You can either choose to mature or you can choose to not mature. Men who choose to mature, they mature. So I hope you all take this message and you all enjoy it. And I hope you all just fall in love with it. This was chapter 5 of Strong Men in Tough Times. And the title today that we talked about was Men Maturing and Choosing Maturity. May God bless you.